Welcome back, guys. Welcome to the Practical Training Podcast right here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're finding us, guys. We're so thankful you decided to tune in today. Today, we're joined by two unique guests. The first is Ryan Gass, lead instructor and founder of Practical Training Professionals, and also Jason McCoy from Redpass Training Solutions out in Utah. Guys, how the hell are we doing today? Jason, what brought you out to Maryland today?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me. Actually, I came out here to teach some classes that Ryan was gracious enough to host out here in Lusby. Also in the area, kind of celebrating the holidays with family and things like that. So.
Nice. And Ryan, what made you, first of all, why are you here? You know I could run this show by myself, man. I don't need a babysitter.
It's for the free dinner. What do we have? Chicken salad?
That's right. Grilled chicken salad tonight. Yep. Right. Hopefully. And you know what, guys, just so you know, Ryan spent like 20 minutes in the restroom before he came down tonight. So we should be good to go.
We should be.
So if you got the sniffometer going on YouTube or on the podcast here, you don't have anything to worry about. But one thing, and if you guys have been following the channel for a while, and if you're in the Southern Maryland or the DMV area, you know that Ryan here and us at PTP, we try to bring in guests from around the country that can showcase different skills and open up our clients to a kind of a different perspective when in firearms training.
Yep.
You know, what I always say is, training isn't an event, it's a journey. And no matter where you lay at on that path to, being the best protector that you can be, there's always somebody that you could learn from. And I had the pleasure of learning from Jason. Earlier in the month, I took the Handgun 1 course, and I thought that was a freaking blast. So what I want to ask Jason right off the bat, just so the audience can get to know you a little bit, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into some of the training that you offer.
Sure, I could definitely do that. So I originally grew up here in Southern Maryland. Like a lot of other kids in this area, I grew up hunting, fishing, around guns, that kind of stuff all the time. I went into the U.S. Air Force when I was 20 years old, 1999-ish. I was a security forces specialist there. So I spent a lot of time guarding nuclear assets, aircraft, doing some police work type stuff. And then had the opportunity to do some competitive shooting, kind of a passion that I wanted to pursue there. I was always kind of very much cognizant of the training aspect of things. And that was something that from a kind of an early age I wanted to get into. I recall before I went to the military, actually, I had an idea that I wanted to enter into law enforcement. And so I wanted to be competent with a handgun. That was something that, I was familiar with, but didn't consider myself particularly skilled at. So I went out, back then in terms of private training, there were only a couple games in town. You had Thunder Ranch, you had Gun Sight with, Jeff Cooper and that crowd. And I bought some old VHS tapes from, Jeff Cooper's series on Gun Sight.
You're aging yourself.
And I just started training.
Yeah, well, there wasn't YouTube back then.
Yeah, there was no YouTube.
Right.
There were the gun magazines. And I think that's where I originally got the tapes from, was I, sent in a mail order or something, right? So I wore these VHS tapes out, and I was fortunate enough to have access to guns and ammo. And, I spent an entire summer with a 1911 and a bucket full of 45s, and I just worked it out, So when I went into the military, I had kind of a leg up on some stuff, and that opened a lot of doors for me in terms of being able to do some competitive shooting, going to some different schools. I was able to get on an emergency services team there, which is kind of their equivalent of a SWAT team for security forces. So I had a pretty good career there, but around 2004 timeframe, at the time, I kind of thought that the whole, Afghanistan, Iraq thing was kind of wrapping up, President Bush said mission accomplished, so it must be mission accomplished, right?
Hindsight's 2020 on that, right?
2020. So, I'm not getting the deployments that I want, that kind of stuff. So, being kind of young and impatient, I got out and decided, I want to pursue this law enforcement goal. I did a little bit of private security work in between. And then in 2006, I went to St. Mary's County Sheriff's Office and started out in Patrol Division. Did about 1.5 years, 2 years there. And I got more or less recruited into what was Bureau of Criminal Investigation at the time, which was a joint investigative unit between St. Mary's County Sheriff's Office and Maryland State Police. And, we covered all the kind of major Part 1 crimes in the county, whether it be, major frauds, rape, murder, robbery, all that kind of stuff. And I worked a little bit of all of that during my career there. I was also on the SWAT team, I call it emergency services team in St. Mary's. They have what's called a decentralized team. So basically everybody on that unit has a full-time job that they do, and then they train for SWAT operations part-time on a kind of a rotating bi-weekly basis, and then like 1 month of training per year. So I was on that starting around that same time. So all in all, I did probably about 8.5 years on SWAT, and I was in investigations as a supervisor and also a line detective for right around 6.5, 7 years, with some stops and patrol in between.
So that took you from 2006 to right around the 2014 timeframe?
It was actually, I got out of there in late 2015, I think.
Okay.
Yep. So at that point, I pulled up stakes. I moved out to southern Utah to kind of facilitate my wife pursuing her career. And I started Redpass Training Solutions. And the entire purpose behind that company was to kind of get to civilians, citizens, if you will, before that victimization point. You know, I felt like in law enforcement, I was kind of always after the fact. It was very reactionary. You know, somebody gets mugged, somebody gets raped, somebody gets murdered, somebody's house gets broken into. We're going out, we're investigating. If things go well, we're bringing suspects to justice. We're going through the trial process, but those people are never really made whole. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You know, once you've been victimized, you've been victimized. And no matter what the outcome of the police investigation from that point forward, you're not really going to be 100% after that fact, or it's going to take a really long time, right?
Yeah, you're always going to have a chink in your armor, right?
Exactly. So what I wanted to get to was the training aspect and take some of the things that I had learned from my military experience, my SWAT experience, my investigative experience, and bring all that into kind of one package and be able to deliver a product to private citizens where they could practice awareness, avoidance, and then ultimately, if they couldn't avoid a problem, be able to confront that with lethal force potentially.
Yeah.
So.
How's the training environment out there? Like I know how it is out here and stuff, but like, and I know Utah's relatively easier to get a permit than it is obviously in Maryland. And that class is, you know, pretty much a 4 or 5 hour class. Like, is that like, do you really mess with that too much, or you do more or less like trying to fine tune people and get them to be safer and more effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Utah is unique. As you mentioned, when I first got out there, it was a shallow issue state. So you go, you do your 4 hour classroom, no live fire, get your permit, you know, as long as you don't have any criminal history, they're good to go, right? So there's not really a training market in the sense that you need the live fire, and most folks are charging, you know, $45-50 to go take the class. I am certified to do that, and I do it. Right now, within the last about 1.5, 2 years, we've become a constitutional carry state, which, you know, honestly, I fully support.
Yeah.
I think it's great. There are still a lot of advantages to getting that concealed carry permit in terms of reciprocity, familiarization with the laws, things of that nature.
Absolutely.
But that said, you know, kind of, I know we've had this conversation before, but it kind of comes back to that Spider-Man rule, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
So it's super easy to get this permit, but a lot of people just don't take that next step to get the training to really be competent and comfortable with that firearm. So that's where I kind of envision the bread and butter from my company coming in, as allowing that next step for them to then become competent and capable and not be a liability when they're out there carrying that gun in public.
What's your favorite class that you teach? What is that?
Handgun 1 is kind of our bread and butter class. So essentially, you know, if you kind of look at the stages of learning, if you will, you've got unconscious incompetence, where basically folks don't know what they don't know. You know, they're just completely clueless as to firearms, you know, whatever the topic at hand might be. And then that next level up, you have conscious incompetence, where they sort of become aware that they don't know stuff. Okay. And that's where I typically find that people are going to want to get into some kind of beginner level training, you know, and that's, you know, familiarization with the firearm itself, gun safety, that sort of thing. You know, hunter safety courses here in Maryland, you've got the HQL, you know, to an extent, the CCW class. It catches them at that level. Where we want to be is that next level up, where they're trying to kind of transition from that conscious incompetence to conscious competence. And then ultimately the next level beyond that would be unconscious competence, where things are just kind of running automatically, and you're able to be so comfortable with the firearm that you've got that level of automaticity, where you can make tactical decisions and evaluate things on the fly without having to concentrate on manipulating the gun itself or performing that task.
No, that's those 4 kind of steps right there. That's unique to me. I've never heard that before. Is that something that you came up with or Redpass Training came up with, or have you learned that somewhere?
I would love to be able to take credit for it, but that's not my idea. So I kind of skipped a step, I guess you would say, on my background. So what I did around the same time that I started my company is I went back to school. Okay, being somebody that came right out of high school and went into the military, I did a lot of reading, a lot of research on my own over the years, but I didn't have a lot of formal education. So I had gotten a associate's degree in criminal justice, kind of going through the military and stuff like that. And when I got out of the sheriff's office, I decided to go back to school. And what I did is I kind of thought to myself, well, I want to be the best instructor that I can possibly be for people in terms of delivering that information to them, but also understanding what they're going to go through in terms of like critical stress and things like that during a lethal force type engagement.
Yeah.
So I selected a variety of coursework and kind of put it all together in this unique degree package. So one of the things that I went after was exercise science in terms of kinesiology, motor learning, that kind of stuff, psychology. I threw in some business because we're all going to make money and be able to count it, right?
Yeah.
And I put this degree together with the intent of trying to make myself a better instructor. It's not like you can go to a 4-year college and say, hey, I want that firearms instructor bachelor's degree. It just doesn't exist.
No, it's right? The foresight there really makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, those 4 things are actually, it's part of kind of adult learning and motor learning concepts. So I wish I could tell you exactly who came up with that concept. You can probably Google it and get a ton of information, but they're pretty broadly understood concepts in terms of adult learning and motor learning.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that. So the Handgun 1, that picks up after somebody. So, Ryan and I, we generally will, we start off where, okay, I've never touched a gun. I want to get smart. I want to be safe around this firearm. And that's where, Maryland makes us deliver the HQL training, right? And we offer that up. And what we hope, right, is that when you leave, you have a basic understanding of the different mechanics of a firearm, of a handgun, be it a revolver or semi-automatic, and then the differences between double action, single action, and stuff like that. But you're also comfortable when you see a firearm, you're not going to get scared of it, right? You know how to safely pick it up, make sure that it's clear, right? And not make yourself a victim or accidentally hurt somebody else, right? And then you also have a live fire exercise so that next time you do, or if you ever do have to deploy your firearm, you're not going to get scared when it goes bang in your hand. That's kind of the first step. And we're soon to introduce some other things about how to use that firearm around the home for self-defense and, home defense awareness and stuff like that. And then the next step is, okay, now that I own a firearm, I'm pretty comfortable around the house. Now I want to take my, my capability that I've developed out into the street with me. And I want to be able to be a better protector of my family out in town. And then that's where the concealed carry training picks up and you get an extra day on the range with us. And then what's next after that? Because as I mentioned, it's a journey, not an event. Well, now you've been able to purchase a handgun. You've had the handgun at home. Now you can carry it out in town should you choose to. Now what's going to make you the most lethal with that firearm should you need to deploy deadly force? And I think that that's where, after having taken your Handgun 1 course, I think that that's where it really kind of brings in the defensive marksmanship of the defensive firing rather than marksmanship, right? And we talked about that a little bit between, flash sight picture and point shoot methods and different stuff like that. I think that that's where we would like to see, another course offering in our lineup. And that's where I think that where Handgun 1 definitely fits in, right? So what builds after that? Like, I took Handgun 1, some of the stuff that we covered there, and guys, you can find all of this and more over there at redpasstrainingsolutions.com, and there'll be links to all of this stuff. It's actually redpasstraining.com. It is Redpass Training Solutions, and all those links will be down in the description below, guys. Make sure you head over there and show him some love. But one of the things that we learned in there, a few things that I felt relatively comfortable after taking your class, but some things that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with getting into that class is shooting right out of the holster. You know what I mean? Actually up on the target and shooting that close. It's something I hadn't done before. I hadn't trained. And it's something that's missing. And if you don't find that in your training somewhere, you're never going to know how to react in that situation. So, what comes next? What comes after Handgun 1? What skills are you delivering after that?
So Handgun 1, I think of that as like our foundational step to basically give that client, that attendee of that course, the basic skills that they need to go out into the 360-degree real world and interact and be safe and competent with that firearm, deploy it, and engage a target effectively. So the next step is Handgun 2, and that's where we get more into application. So we get into some very rudimentary tactics, but we also teach people how to move with the gun effectively. Lateral engagement of targets, basically just sort of that next layer of, I don't really want to call them advanced skills. I think they're just the basics applied in a more specific manner. So a lot of it really focuses on movement, use of cover and concealment, some specific applications like moving in and around a vehicle. This last Handgun 2 course, we were fortunate enough to have a vehicle on site we could shoot out of and around and through, as a matter of fact. So
What comes after that? Right. So this is, I get it. Redpass training, what we've talked about a lot is the use of force, right? But you were talking about awareness and avoidance, right?
Yep.
Where in your training curriculum are you pushing that?
Okay. So what I kind of like to do is I build blocks, if you will, and each block throughout the day builds on the previous one. So in between those, we'll sandwich in some things like situational awareness. We talk about Jeff Cooper's color codes. We talk about the OODA loop. Really, and also those topics vary from course to course, so if I know I've delivered to a certain, group before, I'll try to present something different the next time that they haven't necessarily seen or talked about.
Sure.
So, but those are pretty consistent things where we talk about that situational awareness, because I think that's really paramount. That's where you're going to avoid 99.9% of all your conflicts. That gun is there on your hip for that 0.1 that you can't get out of any other way.
That's right. And I read a statistic somewhere that, most, like 70% or greater of violent encounters happen between 9 and 15 feet, right? So, one of the things that I learned in your course, and something that we stress a lot in our courses, is that defensive firing from the 9 to 15 feet. And, it was something I really picked up. But that, the Handgun too, I wish I would have came out. I had obligations, but, that's where a lot of people don't get the opportunity to train. A lot of people go to their indoor gun range and they stand there and they shoot at paper, 15 yards out, and their grouping is just all over the place. Yeah, that's going to stop a threat. But what happens when you don't know the threat's coming, right? It's not standing there pretty and lighted up and all that other stuff, right? And you've got your ear pro on and all that other stuff, right? What I wish was more common was that there was more people like you all over the place, teaching more classes like this all over the place. And that's one of the reasons Ryan and I wanted to start this podcast, was to introduce our clients and clients around the country to these, unique trainers in each of these states that, we have clients that travel all over the place, and maybe they want to pick up training when they're out in Utah. Who are they going to find, right? Well, they can go and check out Redpass Training Solutions. And I think that's really cool. Training is a journey. So you mentioned that, Handgun 1's your bread and butter, but is that your most favorite class to teach, and why?
It is.
Why or why not,
It is.
I should say.
It is, because I think that the bulk of people that I run into, like I said, they're at that conscious incompetence phase. So they've got the handgun, they've bought it, they've taken a basic class, maybe they've done some familiarization somewhere, and they're looking for that next level. Like I get a lot of people who have the gun, they've got the concealed carry permit, but they don't carry the gun. And the reason that they typically cite is they're not comfortable. What I want to do with that class is impart the skill set that they need by the end of that course, that they're going to be comfortable carrying that gun. And more importantly, they're going to know what they need to practice and what they can do on their own to reach that unconscious competence level where they have that automaticity with the gun. And that's what we're really trying to get to. That's I don't want to say it's the end state of that journey, because the journey is indefinite. But we want to get to the point where we have that automaticity with those skills, where we can free up our brain processing power in order to be able to focus on the tactical problem at hand, not the firearms and the gun handling part.
Sure.
Have you, not even if someone hasn't come back and talked to you about it, it still could have happened, but have you had students that you've trained that have had to use their firearm, and how did that go for them, if that's the case?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of anybody since I've been teaching to the public who has utilized training that I've given them. And I want to be careful about overstating my role in police training. I did a lot of police training for recruit classes. I coordinated our SWAT team training for several years. So I definitely delivered training to folks that have been in shootings. I've had at least one person come back to me and cite that training that we had provided them specifically helped them in that particular event. And, you know, but again, that's kind of I'm very cautious of discussing other people's shootings.
Right. Understood.
You know?
Like, because you bring this perspective that we don't have of like law enforcement. With that, I don't know where the fuck I was going with that. I had something. Fuck.
You bring it back around.
Yeah. I fucking saw a tennis ball and a squirrel. I'm like, gosh, shit. That's what I was going to hit. So with law enforcement and you having a background in law enforcement, you also have a background of training on civilian side and law enforcement. This is not at all to try to knock law enforcement or anything like that or any particular department, but what do you see in general in law enforcement lacking the most when it comes to training? Where would you like to see improvement the most?
I think the biggest thing with law enforcement is lack of time, lack of resources. And I think what it comes down to in many cases is just flat out manpower. A lot of agencies, and I think this was typical of the one I come from, certainly, is that, you know, there was enough money there for a decent amount of ammunition. We had good gear. We had good support from our administration. But a lot of times guys just didn't get the training time because you have to have people out on the road doing the job, you know. So your average patrol officer, I mean, they're qualifying with their handgun maybe twice a year, with their long gun maybe once a year. And they're not getting a lot of follow-on training. So the approach that I always took to it, you know, in the positions that I worked, is it was contingent on me to make sure I got that additional training. And for me, you know, being a part of the SWAT team and EST was a big part of that, and it opened up a lot of opportunities for additional training. You know, we would typically train at least on a bi-weekly basis. So, but like I said, every patrol officer that's out there doesn't have that, you know, that level of training and that level of opportunity. So it becomes contingent on them to train on their own time and seek out, you know, private trainers to go and train with. And that's something that I started with early in my military career and continued with throughout my law enforcement career. So it really, I mean, just like with citizens, it's really contingent on personal responsibility and taking that extra level of engagement to go out and seek out the training. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I've been at a few classes and stuff where, like with other instructors and stuff, and you see, you know, you got the average, you know, firearms, average law-abiding citizen. You got, you know, instructors like myself that are also there. You got law enforcement officers and stuff. Like I was at a class with Dave Spalding at the Crucible up in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we had probably out of 20, I want to say it was about 29 students. I think at least 10 of those at least were active law enforcement, and like one actually came all the way out, flew out from LA. He's LAPD and stuff. But it was nice seeing, you know, it's crazy. I mean, because they take a lot of their time and money to be able to go to these classes and because they take their safety, you know, and the safety of their partners really paramount, because like you said, they get, you know, generally speaking, good training stuff, but it's not, in general speak, I've never found anybody that worked in law enforcement that said that they get enough training, that they feel that it's sufficient. They can always get more, but some take that extra mile and time and money to actually go out there and seek that on their own time. And I really like when I see that, you know, whether it's, you know, more of, you know, work on their marksmanship or more of getting into defensive things, because that's the stuff that they really like. I carry a gun and stuff, but the chances of me and any other average law-abiding citizen actually using our firearms, honestly, if we're looking at statistics, is relatively slim. When you are working in a law enforcement capacity, that chances go up a lot farther and stuff. And it's not only yourself that you're protecting, but you're protecting your fellow officer, but you're also protecting the public too. So it's nice seeing when those guys, you know, are willing to take their time, like you've been doing too, and going to these other classes. With that being said, you know, you're not working in that capacity in law enforcement anymore at the time, at least. But like, you know, do you still seek out other training, and how often do you try to do that each year?
I seek out other training as often as possible. You know, whether that's training with somebody locally. You know, I just finished up a class back in October with Frank Proctor from Proctor Performance Shooting, I believe is the name of the company. I've trained with Craig Douglas in the past, with ShivWorks, Andy Stanford, a pretty decent list of instructors. So anytime that I see that kind of opportunity open up, I'm going to take it. Time and money allowing, just like everybody else. But, I think it's contingent on us as responsible armed citizens to, like you said, continue that training journey and always be looking for the next step. And what I like about the civilian training community the most is you can always take a class that's going to reveal your next set of kind of weaknesses that you need to work on. Like you mentioned, you had never shot from the retention position until my class. Well, the next logical step to that would be, hey, go find Craig Douglas and take a ShivWorks ECQC class. Sure. Extreme close quarter shooting. Because that is that problem in a nutshell, and that's his bread and butter.
What class or what instructor have you not trained with and you really want to? What's on that bucket list of you have to go to that?
Up until recently, Frank was at the top of the list. I ticked that off the box. I would love to train with Mike Pannone at CTT Solutions. Kyle DeFore is another guy I would love to train with. I'm pretty open-minded, but honestly, like at the point where I'm at developmentally in my own journey, the folks that I typically want to shoot with are either USPSA competitive shooters that really have that speed and movement thing dialed in, or I want to look at somebody with a very specific military background that is different from my own. And typically that's guys coming out of the Tier 1 community.
Yeah.
Well, that opens up another question, right? So we talked about your Handgun 1 and Handgun 2 offerings, but what else are you offering in terms of like all around self-defense? So I know a lot of instructors do, they practice jujitsu in their free time and stuff like that. And they try to bring in close quarter combat stuff. I know you mentioned ShivWorks and stuff, but are you, while you're out there learning from the community of other instructors, are you trying to synthesize that and then develop your own unique set of courses that you can then offer your clients?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think that is kind of once we talked about, once you're comfortable and capable of going out and carrying that gun in that 360-degree environment, I think the next logical step is having some empty hand skills, whether it's grappling. I've done some jiu-jitsu in the past, Muay Thai, that kind of stuff. I think it's good to be actively training those kind of skills. And, we talked about ShivWorks where they're kind of synthesizing that stuff together, and I think that's important. From my perspective, one of the things that I'm very careful about is I always kind of want to stay in my lane and in my specialization. If I ever got to the point where I felt that those skills were unconsciously competent for me personally, and I not only felt that I had that skill level, but I could meaningfully impart it on somebody else, that's the point where I would deliver that training program.
That's respectable. Yeah, that's respectable. Yeah. I think that's where everybody should be. I've spoken with other fans of the show, guys, and if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. Some of the other guests that we've had on the show, Lee Weems, we had on, and he spoke about how it normally will take somewhere between 10 and 15 years as a student before you finally have gained enough mastery of a subject to be able to teach that, right? And you see so many people, and with the way that, we always see this, and Ryan and I were talking about this offline in the past, and we talk about it all the time. But right, every time there's a crisis, there's a new breed of firearms instructors that pop up out of the woodworks. Other people call them like vet bros, right? You see them doing these 180-degree field of fire with, people standing, they're completely unsafe about it. And it's just because they just don't know. They think, oh, here's a market, I'm going to go start teaching. And they just, like you said, they don't stay in their lane, or they don't have the skills necessary to be able to
overextend themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're talking about this training that you're taking to become a better, what I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but to better develop yourself as a firearm user. Are you taking any other courses, like instructor courses from, Range Master or anything like that?
I haven't gotten into a lot of the instructor development stuff. Like I said, when I went back to school, one of the things I focused on was the adult learning, motor learning concepts. So I took a deep dive into that. A lot of the reading and research I do is specifically on instructor development. But, again, I would love to take a specific instructor development class. I've done the NRA certification, which, surprisingly, a lot of people kick on it, but there's some really good instructor development that is part of that certification. And I went into it with a little bit of a cringe factor because I had heard so many negative things about that training, and I was pleasantly surprised that it was, very professional. There were certain things that I thought were a little bit off, but if you look at it in context, I think they're still putting out pretty good information.
If you want me to ask, how long ago was that you went through that program?
It's been about a year, something like that. I had a contract for a security company that specifically wanted me to be an NRA certified instructor. So, and I've been through, Maryland Police Training Commission. I was an instructor through them as well. So I've done instructor development in the past, kind of throughout my career.
So I recently got USCCA certified as part of what we're trying to do out here in Maryland. And one of the things that I saw that was most valuable there, outside of like the curriculum and some of the instructor development stuff, was the community. Right? Because when you join that, right, there is the instructor assistance that you can get. You can call up a number, the instructor hotline, and ask questions whenever you want, right? But there's, unique Facebook groups of, all these people that are doing this similar instruction. I think if you're just kind of like if you try to be a lone wolf and do your own thing, you're missing out on that network, right? The community of other instructors that are all kind of teaching the similar stuff, right? You're teaching from the same framework. So, I know I'm not here to badmouth the NRA or uptalk the USCCA or any other organization, but you squint your eyes at anything, you're going to find somebody that's talking crap about it, and, you got to ask yourself, everybody that's listening is ask yourself, what have you done to further the cause? Right. And if you're like, well, I ain't done anything, but NRA's this or that. Well, come on, guy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Hold yourself accountable before you start pointing fingers everywhere else. Right.
Totally agree.
As cliche as it sounds, there's a reason they knife hand in the military. Because if you point your finger, for every finger you got out, you got 3 more pointing back at you, right? That's what they say. Whatever. That's what I heard. Anyways, that's that. But yeah, one of the things I always like to ask people, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, comfort, right? When people leave your class, you want them to be comfortable with that firearm, because that's one of their largest complaints is I don't carry because I'm not comfortable carrying. My wife, she has a concealed carry permit, and she doesn't carry as often as I do because she's just not very comfortable with it. And maybe that's because of the gears or gadgets. She hasn't necessarily found the best holster that fits her wardrobe, because how girls are, right? Especially when the seasons change. I got to get a new holster, right? Yeah. But what other, and this is a question I always ask everybody, and but what are if I, assume, and I always mess up the words here, assume I'm a guy, right? And I'm a guy that just came to your course and you've never met me before. Right. And I don't know anything really about firearms. I used to shoot with my grandpa on the farm, and I come to Handgun 1, right? Your favorite class. What are your 3 fundamentals? What are the 3 things that you hope that a new student would take away from your course?
Yeah. So the first thing is always safety. We start with it at the basic level courses, and it continues in everything that we do, right on up to force on force, quote unquote advanced tactics, CQB. There's always a safety element. So what I want them to understand is how those 4 basic safety rules that we always talk about apply out in the real world. Okay. We talk about knowing our target and what's behind it, for example. Well, when I take that and apply it to, say, an active shooter situation in a Walmart, now I need to know if I'm engaging that bad guy from one end cap to the next, it's about 50 yards. Okay. Do I know what's on the other side of the flanks of that target and what might come between me and them if I need to engage them? That's how I would take that and apply it out in the real world. Same thing with keeping your finger off the trigger, out of the trigger guard, and, not pointing that gun at anything we don't intend to destroy. 2 very important concepts on the range, but they're equally applicable off the range out in the real world. That's what's going to keep us safe, and that's what's going to keep us from inadvertently, engaging somebody who's not a threat, right? So I want them to understand how those safety rules apply out in the real world. The other thing is I want them to have a positive outlook on firearms training in general, and I want them to have had a good time at my class. We talk about adult learning and motor learning. There's inverted U concept, right, where you've got somebody who's way too challenged, they're overwhelmed, they're not having a good time, that person's not learning. Okay? Right. The person who's not challenged at all, who's bored by the material, it's not, the delivery's not engaging, they're not learning. We want to be at the top of that U where they're engaged and challenged enough to be actively absorbing that material and retaining it. But we don't want to push them so far to the point of, either end where they're just not learning anything. Mm-hmm. So I want to keep them there as much as possible throughout that 8-hour course or whatever it may be. And then finally, I want them to absorb whatever the purpose of that particular class was. Like I said, with Handgun 1, it's those foundational elements. With Handgun 2, it's movement, cover, applications. Okay. So I want them to have kind of internalized that by the end of the day. And I'll add a fourth element in there. I want them to be.
And that's against the rules. 3. You got 3 questions. I can't be giving you 4 or 3 4. I can't give you 4. I didn't give anyone else.
3.5?
I'm kidding. Yeah, give me 3.5. Why not?
So the 0.5 is that I want them to. Now I lost my train of thought.
It must not have been that important. No,
yeah, it was important enough. So the 0.5 is that I want those guys to. I really did lose it.
If you think about it, write it down. I'll pick up, and then like if you remember, you can bring it back up. My thing is, I want to take advantage of the fact that you have a background in law enforcement and get those questions that people might ask or whatnot, or they have, based on your experience in law enforcement and whatnot. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. What advice would you provide, say, to a family member if? And this is obviously, advice before the fact. If somebody's in a self-defense situation and, the threat has been neutralized, whatever that might mean in a situation, what would be your, again, without being like a lawyer, what would be your legal advice on how to conduct themselves afterwards to make sure that having done the right thing, that they don't end themselves in jail? Because that happens sometimes, sometimes people do the right thing and they articulate the wrong way or they say the wrong thing, and next thing you know, they're going to jail for something that they really shouldn't have gone to jail for. What would be your advice to avoid doing that?
Well, I think that starts before the shooting takes place.
Yes.
So they got to be familiar with the law. They have to be familiar with their rights under the law, what they can and can't do, what they probably shouldn't do. Within the context of, whether they be out in public, in their home, what have you. At that point where the shooting has occurred, I think we have to remember we're going to keep everything on the up and up. We've all heard that trope of, if you shoot the guy on the porch, drag him into your house, don't do that.
No.
Okay. Forensics are pretty good.
Yeah.
The cops are going to figure that out really quick. Mm-hmm. Okay. So first off, make sure that you're acting within your scope of authority under the color of the law. Okay. And then at that point, obviously, we want to make contact with the police. If you can make contact with the police before the shooting takes place, so say someone's breaking into your home actively, you call, you leave the phone on speaker, and you're communicating with the dispatcher as this is going on. They're hearing you say, "Hey, stay out of my house, stay out of my house. I'm armed. Don't come in here. Don't come in here." Bang, bang, bang. Right? They heard those warnings. Okay, that's going to be entered into evidence. Okay. But then, say you don't have that luxury and you're calling after the fact, you need to convey the facts in as clear and concise a manner as possible. Okay. Someone broke into my home. I shot them. They're injured. I need an ambulance. I need a police response. Now, obviously, you're going to be completely redlined at this point. Regardless of your level of training, you're going to be on overload. Okay. So it pays to kind of have some things rehearsed beforehand, that preparatory step. But in all honesty, having been on the criminal investigation side of that equation, my recommendation to folks would be say as little as possible. Mm-hmm. Give kind of what you would consider a public safety statement. This is what happened. This is my residence. This is an intruder. Yes, I engaged them with my firearm. I don't want to make any more statements than that without an attorney present. Mm-hmm. Now, that may very well be that you're taken into custody. You could go to jail until you have an opportunity to have a preliminary hearing. But in the long run, I think you're much better off to make a statement with an attorney present and after some time has passed, so you're not in that immediate sensory overload phase where you're kind of reeling from the aftermath of that immediate violence, right?
Yeah. Have you, whether directly with your line of work or whether out and about in general, like, have you ever seen a situation that kind of stuck out in your mind? And you're like, damn, I really wish that person had conducted themselves differently. My hands are kind of tied, or you can see how law enforcement hands are tied, and it's going to lead to a certain conclusion and stuff. Like, like they say, for example, the Rittenhouse situation, outside of the obvious, which is it would have been better if he had not been there at all and stuff. But like, let's say, based on your knowledge of the situation and evidence you've seen, like, what do you think that could have been done better?
I can't think of anything specific to the Rittenhouse situation. We can wind the clock back a little bit more and talk about George Zimmerman.
Yes,
That's a good example.
Yes.
Between the time that Zimmerman was initially confined and then when he ultimately went to trial, he did a public interview, and portions of that public interview were used against him in that trial. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing where I would just say, don't make any public statements. Be cognizant of what you're saying to people around you. Don't be texting your buddy like, I totally smoked that guy, mm-hmm. That kind of thing. You want to be very conservative and professional in the way that you conduct that, and follow your attorney's advice to a letter.
Yeah, the USCC is real big on like the 3 calls you make right after in a situation where you've had to draw your firearm, whether you deploy it or not. Right. The first is to be as minimalistic as possible when talking to the dispatcher, because anything you say in that, dynamic critical incident type situation can and most likely will be used against you. Say as little as possible to communicate as much as you can. Right. The second call is to your attorney. If you have fired, or even if you haven't, and if you have fired, that if you have deployed your firearm, that third call should be to your family. There will be people coming to the house. Don't say anything. Mm-hmm. Right, because at least this is the instruction that we're instructed to give by the USCCA is like, don't say anything, because anything you say most likely will influence a jury or the prosecutor. Right, you have to look at it through that lens.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about wearing T-shirts and slogans and things like that in public. And one of the points that I made to them is, look, depending on the specifics of your shooting situation, there may be a search warrant conducted on your home, and you need to be cognizant of what you have in your house and what impression that might leave on a jury. When they see that, or what kind of loopholes that's going to provide a prosecutor to kind of jump through and paint you as some sort of, vigilante, if you will.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not a jury of your peers. Those 12 people sitting up there have never shot somebody. You know what I'm saying? They don't, it's not a jury of your peers if you look at it at that. Yeah. They're going to go through your Facebook history. They're going to go through your Twitter history, whatever. They're going to ask your friends, your neighbors, your family, that ex-girlfriend that you dumped to marry your wife, all that stuff. They're going to ask everybody. They're going to dig deep. I think the best thing to do is have a good lawyer.
I think I definitely have grown in that too. I mean, with time and experience and become a parent and all that type of stuff, you kind of mature up and stuff. Like we've probably all said in our life at one point, whether jokingly or thinking it was serious, like I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Like not so much that as much as shoot first, ask questions later. That's an ignorant statement. And I've made that statement thinking it was cool or whatever, and you kind of grow up and you realize that's not how it should be. That's how you go to jail.
Yeah, that's an absence of training, and that's this brings up an interesting point. I try to talk to all of the guests about this point right here. Right, you mentioned it at the beginning when Ryan was talking about concealed carry training courses in Utah and stuff like that. Yes, I think we all agree, and the founders of this country, I have it right here on the wall, the Second Amendment. We all agree that it's our God-given right to be able to protect ourselves. Right. And that includes the right to bear arms, but, Ryan and I, we go back and forth on this. I got a 16-year-old daughter upstairs. Am I comfortable just tossing her the keys to the car and saying, go ahead, without any kind of training? Right. And I understand that driving a car is a privilege, whereas carrying a firearm is a right. But, do you think, and maybe you're going to lose some clients by saying the answer, who knows, right? But do you think that there should be some minimum training before somebody, can carry a firearm? Let's say like a handgun, a concealed handgun. Use that specific.
It's a really good question. That is a really good question. I'll start with this. I think that citizens have a natural right, pre-existing in the Constitution, pre-existing the Second Amendment, to defend themselves with the best tools available. That being said, I'm in favor of citizens owning whatever kind of weapons they can purchase on the open market. Okay. If you want to sell me an M240 Bravo, I should be able to buy an M240 Bravo and eat my breakfast with it on the freaking kitchen table. Right. Yeah. I think that is an absolute natural right. Okay. Shouldn't be infringed upon by the government, period, full stop. That being said, Like I said at the very beginning, those rights, okay, those natural rights, those rights under the Constitution, they also come with a corresponding individual responsibility. If I buy that 240 Bravo, I better know how to use it effectively, safely, and not hurt my neighbor. Okay. Now, does everybody have that level of maturity? No, they sure don't. Doing what we do, having the experiences we've had, we've seen all types and different walks of life come through classes. Some of them very capable, and some, frankly, who
should have no business being out there.
Exactly. Don't have the coordination, don't have the common sense. They're probably more than likely always going to be a liability versus an asset. But I would much rather everybody else be able to retain their rights versus the government trying to regulate out that small percentage of people.
To kind of piggyback off of his question, but do it in a different way, your experience, your life experience in Maryland was different than what you are having in Utah. In Maryland, you worked as law enforcement. You're not working in a law enforcement capacity out there, but I'm sure you're in tune with your community. Based on what you've seen and lived in Maryland, and seeing and knowing that there's requirements like for the HQL and the concealed carries 2 days, like full days, and then the dramatic switch to going to Utah. There's no requirement for training to own a firearm. There's relatively little requirement to be able to carry. Is Utah more dangerous of a place for anyone to live because of how loose the gun laws are compared to Maryland? Is Maryland safer because the strict training requirements and the shall may issue? Per your perspective, and it's not 100%, but what do you feel about that?
The only thing that I see in Utah that I think could probably be weeded out a little bit with stricter laws, which again, I'll state that I'm not in favor of, is you get a lot of guys that, on your average walk through Walmart, you'll see somebody with, a handgun strapped to their hip, and an Uncle Mike's holster that's hanging halfway off their belt and the retention strap's undone, and, their 2-year-old is, hanging out next to them. And it's cringy. Yeah. It really is. And I don't see that as much in Maryland just because the laws are structured the way they are, probably. But again, I do think that, for that one guy, there's probably 10 or 15 people in that same Walmart that are concealed carrying a handgun that wouldn't be able to in Maryland, and they're doing it safely and competently and would be assets versus liabilities if there was a situation there.
When you were law enforcement in Maryland, I came on to help run law enforcement, you bring up a different perspective. Had you ever seen a situation where someone was the victim of a violent crime and they expressed how prior to that being a victim of that violent crime, they attempted to be able to get a carry permit but were denied?
I can't recall ever encountering that specific situation. I do know that there were instances where, particularly dealing with like early stages of domestic violence, there were people that expressed an interest in being able to get a concealed carry permit that weren't able to in enough of a, I guess soon enough to matter is the best way to put it. Just it's kind of a daunting process in Maryland. And if you don't know how to navigate it, or you're not able to source somebody that knows those laws in and out and kind of guide you through that process like you do for a lot of your clients, it can be confusing, and it can be hard for them to get that permit when they really need it,
Yeah. With that being said, I will say we are working on buttoning up the schedule for May, June, July, August time period. And in that time period, we're going to have our next free concealed carry class for victims of domestic violence or people that are in a situation like that. So if you're listening and that's something that interests you, stay tuned because we'll be releasing that information here in the next probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is just email Mike@PTPGun.com for any of those questions. And what you were talking about there, and this is kind of a caveat, all right? It is incredible, and a lot of our listeners aren't from Maryland, but we've talked about it enough on the podcast. People probably know it can be incredibly difficult to get your permit in Maryland because it is a may issue. You have to have good and substantial reason. One of those reasons is you have to have proof that your life is in danger, right? Either through an ex parte peace order, or you have to have notarized statements from, witnesses that understand or can testify that you have indeed are in threat of your life, right? Interestingly enough, we're helping a client right now complete his paperwork. And we've been working with him for a few months now, right? We started with him, we gave him the training, and then we sat down and we've been doing the application assistance for him. And his reason is because he was, he's mugged. He got the crap beat out of him, and he has the police report and all this stuff, right? And when we went to help, when he submitted we can't submit anything for anybody, but, helped him get all of his stuff together and submit the package. The investigator said, hey, we actually need the police report, right? And we, did what we had to do, helped him procure that from the Baltimore City Police. Well, while he was waiting on that to happen, my wife just got a phone call from him. Was it yesterday or the day before? He's been jumped again. Got the crap beaten out of him, right? He's bloodied, bruised up, EMTs, all this other stuff. He called the investigator, Maryland State Police investigator, and said, guys, what's going on with my permit? Like this, I literally got beat up again because your incompetence. Why can't you in the licensing division go down the hall and talk and just pull your own freaking police report? They can show you that I've been a victim, right? And so guess what they were able to do, Jason? They went down the hallway and said, okay, yeah, we've got this all figured out. We're going to expedite your permit to carry. What if, and we talked about this during Red Flag in a different show we did a long time ago about red flag laws. What if that man would have died a couple days ago? Would the Maryland State Police be culpable for any fault?
Well, I'd say more so the
you know what I'm saying?
I would say more so, but maybe partly.
Yeah, the Maryland General Assembly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's on the politicians because
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of I recognize it's partly they're
just doing their job. Yeah,
but I do think there's still a little responsibility there, but it's ultimately on the lawmakers because they're the ones that can actually bring the change and stuff. And like some of them will say, well, we never passed this law. It's not on me and stuff. Well, you're maintaining it though.
That's right.
So they're the ones that have not tried to bring the change so that gentleman doesn't have to be a victim of a crime twice before they start expediting this process and getting his paperwork good.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. I've talked to victims. I used to do a different podcast, and I talked to some victims of rape and stuff like that. And, from a firearms perspective, in the state of Maryland, if if the day you turn 21, you want to go out and buy a handgun because you're a single. I'm just going to use this for instance. I know men are victims of sexual harassment and stuff, but I'm using a woman here, okay? The more delicate species, if you will. You're a young woman, you're moving off to college, you're not staying on campus because you can't own a firearm on campus, and you're living off campus and you want to be able to defend yourself, but now you can't go and buy a firearm whenever you want. You got to wait 7 days. Well, what if you were threatened in school and somebody said, I'm coming to your house, what are you going to do? The law has you trapped. And I know we're going way off topic here, guys. We're trying to get Jason's story right, but this the shithole we find ourselves in here in Maryland. It's
that's why Jason evacuated, went to Utah.
Yeah, but
so one of the reasons.
So I'm gonna try to tie some things back together here. All right. None of us think that we should have our laws infringed any more than they are. Some people will say there's over 22,000 laws on the books already around firearms in this nation. Enforce those laws you have now. Don't make any more laws. We don't need any more laws. We don't need a mandatory training law. My thing is this. I don't want some Chuck with the truck, 17-year or 18-year-old, right? With the firearm in the mall acting like a good guy. Right, and accidentally not know his field of fire or his backstop and end up shooting somebody because he wanted to be a hero. I think that there should be some minimum. There is, like you said, a responsibility, but whose job is it to force responsibility? In the military, we all had that drill sergeant, right?
It's not the government's money.
It's not. No, you're right. You're right. So how can we? I spoke with a guy, Derek LeBlanc, out in the Pacific Northwest. He started this foundation called Kids Safe. What he's doing, and he's went up against the state senate, and he's trying to implement this process where he introduces firearms awareness, firearms safety to children as young as 7 years old in schools. He's already taught this program to over 50,000 students, and he's trying to get it to go national. He's done Oregon, Washington, California, and Hawaii. All right. So what if, what we've seen over the decades, especially in metropolitan states and states that are growing like Maryland, what we've seen is a decrease in common practical sense in schools and more geared toward university-driven economics and stuff like that, right? So how can maybe the solution is to reintroduce children to firearms at a younger age, right? So it's not a law. It's something that parents can do. It's something that we can push in our school boards, and we could start local at that level and try to get awareness there so that when these kids, when they're growing up, you know how many people are scared of a big black gun like this one hanging on the wall? Everybody. Oh, I'm scared of that. Why? Because somebody told you should be. But what if I came in and, what do we do in war, Jason? We go there, we blow everything up, and then we build schools. And we do that so that we could, I'm not going to use the dirty words here. We do that so that we could educate, right? Not indoctrinate, right? No, we would never do that. We educate the youth. And what we do is we wipe out the intellectual contagions and we implant Western philosophy, right? And as we build them up, they become much more amiable to what we preach here in the West. Firearms community needs to do the same thing in schools. We need to get to these children as early as possible and raise them up in what's called living the gun life, if you will, right? Where they're not afraid, where if they see a gun on the street or somebody, you know, commits a homicide, throws their gun in the garbage can, and next thing you know, the garbage can gets tilted over and there's a gun there, what's the kid going to do? Is he going to pick it up and point it at his buddies?
Nope.
Right? How can we stop that?
Yeah, get the curiosity
right?
out of them.
And then if we were able to introduce firearms awareness and safety at that young of an age, and we do it across the country to all kids, as they grow older, when they turn 18 or 21, depending on whatever the frick the law says at that point in time, I think society at large would feel a lot more comfortable with responsible gun ownership. And there wouldn't need to be government laws that say you have to take a 16-hour course. It would put Ryan and I out of business. It probably put him, you know, it wouldn't take that away. It wouldn't take the business away, but it would take that class away. Because now I could focus on what Jason's doing. I could teach you how to be more practical with your firearm, right? I think that's the approach we need to take. And what does that take? It takes us, you know, speaking sometimes with our pocketbook, but actually getting out there and, you know, preaching this stuff. Right? The time of not talking about, you know, politics at the dinner table is past because the left is the anti-gun group, I should say, has, you know, all they do is talk and they're the ones that are getting laws made. Right. So sorry, I got a little passionate there, but I think that that's where this starts. Yep. I think there's a middle ground where we're not asking the government to create more mandatory training. I think civilians create mandatory training and we introduce it in schools. What do you think about that?
It's an interesting idea. I'm in favor of very basic firearm safety education in the school, like a familiarization. Yeah. You know, what do you do if you find a gun kind of thing?
Yeah.
I don't know that I would take it much beyond that point.
Right.
I'm very leery about ever advocating for government intervention in anything.
Right.
You know, we've all worked for the government at some point, you know, there's not a lot that it does well.
No.
You know, it's not efficient.
Yep. Especially if you deal with them when it comes to paperwork and bureaucracy.
Right. That's true.
So, you know, I think the solution, in all honesty, I agree that you have to have that kind of common sense approach to gun ownership ingrained in younger kids and start them on that journey early. But I think the real solution to that is us as individuals doing that in our homes, you know, doing that as, you know, as entrepreneurs, as part of our business practices. You know, we're educating parents, so hopefully they can go home and educate their kids in those fundamentals and those life safety rules. And I think it's cultural. And, you know, frankly, I think that's one of the things that the left has done really well in the last 20 years plus. They have won the culture war. You know, right now we are at a deficit. You know, they own Hollywood, they own the media. Everything that we and our kids consume on a day-to-day basis is infused with
certain propaganda.
It has that indoctrination aspect that you talked about earlier, but it's working against us. And I think the first thing that we have to start doing is we need to start recapturing that territory. And we got a lot of ground to make up, you know, and I think it's got to be a grassroots effort, and it starts in your home and in your house. And you saying, hey, you know, little Susie, little Johnny, I know you saw this on TV, but here's what I think about it. And this is why I think that. And this is the way that I was raised. And let me teach you more about that so you can get a perspective other than what you're being presented at school or other than what you're being presented in the media.
Well, that's a micro, if we look at it in terms of economics, that's a very microeconomics approach. Right. That's managing your household's budget. Right. But what we have to do is fix the deficit. And to do that, we need to be on a macro level right? And that's why, as conservatives, and I'm a conservative, I'm not speaking on behalf of the conservative party or anything like that. But what I am saying is that we've always done a good job of managing our household, right? But where the other side has done a great job is they've managed society. We need to get more in the acts of managing society. We need to get in, and I think that's where we're at, Jason. Feel free to disagree with me. That's why I'm saying screw the parents. Parents aren't coming out to classes enough. We got to get to the kids. I think we have to.
Here's my counterpoint. Okay.
Let's hear it.
I think that we get on a really slippery slope when any third party thinks that they can intervene on behalf of anybody else and tell them how to live their lives. Right. Anytime we're coming in with some kind of utopian solution, we run the risk of infringing on somebody else's civil liberties. Mm-hmm. Certainly the left is doing that to us right now. But the thing is, from our perspective, we need to be cognizant that when we set a precedence that, we're going to, do this comprehensive firearms education with 7-year-olds. Well, what happens when the next president comes into office and now he wants to do comprehensive sex education and pass out condoms to our 8-year-old?
Right.
You got to be aware that your quote unquote enemy is always going to use your tactics against you, and I think that one of the things we fundamentally have to do is we have to stop thinking in terms of a bifurcated system. We have to somehow get this country back to a place where we can have meaningful, peaceful, respectful discourse and not want to infringe on the other guy.
No, you're right. And, the argument against the guns in school stuff is this, right? The biggest argument I've heard is you're teaching kids how to be active shooters, right? That's what they say. I know, but that's a far swing. It's a far swing. I'm not advocating any of that. Like you, I could remember a time where in the magazines it showed there's a school up in, I think it's Prince George's County or Montgomery County, I can't remember which one, where there used to be a pool. And underneath that pool was an indoor range. And kids used to be able to go and you could take marksmanship as one of your electives. That's all I'm saying, right? I think that they need to be brought back in as an elective so that the awareness exists. I'm not talking about teaching 7-year-olds to join Appleseed, which is a good program, and I advocate for that. It's something you grow on. You don't teach a 7-year-old calculus. You wait until they're ready mentally and physically, mentally and spiritually ready for that crap. You know what I'm saying? I just think it needs to be introduced at that level. That's where I'm coming from. And I'm not the smartest guy in the room most of the time. Yeah. Right. I think that if I, present the ideas, somebody may take that and be able to apply that. Maybe there's somebody listening that's on a school board or something that says, you know what, maybe that makes sense.
Or somebody running for a school board.
Yeah, exactly. More to follow on that.
Yeah. And Mike, I don't think we're too far apart on that.
Yeah. What I think on that, what I think is like you said, that's a great point. Is sex ed, firearms education. I think that there's obviously a certain age we should be, not doing it too early. That, and we shouldn't. And just like I don't want them to do it with other topics, I don't think we should push the politics of it. It's just a simple firearms safety and firearms handling and stuff. Not even, it doesn't honestly even so much require shooting, or at least a lot of shooting. I would say a little bit of shooting. Main thing is just, how to safely handle a firearm and what to do when you're around a firearm, and understanding what they can and what they can't do too.
Guys, listen, if you're listening now, if you're watching on YouTube, I encourage you guys to send any good topics you have or ideas that maybe you can see a common sense approach to how we could kind of solve some of the things that we've been talking about, right? Because that's what Ryan and I, and for that matter, Jason, that's why we do this, right? It's for you, it's for society, right? We want a better or more polite society, and part of that is, firearms instruction. But last time I accidentally cut you off. I would like to know what this 0.5 is. Were you able to pull that back out yet?
I was able to pull it back out.
All
so
right.
That final thing that I want people to be able to walk away from my training with is I want them to be able to take the skills that we ingrained and delivered in that course, and I want them to have a foundation to be able to practice that on their own so they get to that unconscious competence level. Because that's what makes that happen, is repetition. And we could get into the neurology behind it and all that, but the basics are you have to work through the skill on your own. You have to make some mistakes. You have to correct your own mistakes, and you got to repeat it over and over again until it becomes automatic.
And that leads me to kind of my last topic here. I think that I know we're coming up on time here, if you guys are okay with it. Some technology. I really wanted to ask you two questions, and maybe you could answer the first one quick, and I'll jump into the second one. All right. But so let me ask you the first question real quick here. What's your favorite, what's your ideal student?
That's a great question. My ideal student, I like to have people come into my class that already have basic safety knowledge and have that pretty well hardwired in. I like them to be at least comfortable enough with the firearm that, you know, they can load it, unload it, put some rounds down range. They don't have to have a lot of marksmanship capability. And I don't want them to have a lot of pre-ingrained bad habits. We all know as guys, you know, growing up where we grew up, you know, you're exposed to firearms, you know, you've been out hunting with Uncle Joe or whatever. You got some bad habits that you need to get over.
Uncle Joe every time.
Yep, Uncle Joe, right? So I like to get folks that are not afraid of the gun, but they're ready to take that next step and they don't have a lot already imprinted on them. And I can take somebody like that from the beginning of the day where they're, you know, say not able to shoot a 3 to 5 inch group and have them, you know, shooting a, you know, 1.5 to 2 inch group in, you know, 3 to 5 seconds by the end of the day. You know, you can take somebody like that and go leaps and bounds and have them set up. And I really find that female shooters in particular, in a lot of cases, meet that criteria because they don't have a lot of pre-ingrained BS.
Yep, and they leave the ego behind,
and
or they don't have it.
Or they didn't bring it to begin with.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's right. So awesome, and that aligns very well with the kind of where I'm at with the students I like to, you know, help. Yeah, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, man. You guys, if you guys would like to hear more from Jason, to be honest with me, let me know in the comments, and we'll get him on a Zoom call out there in Utah or stuff like that. Because
we'll have him back out in 2022 too.
Yeah, we'll have him back out here pretty soon, out here to teach more classes, guys. If you want to find more classes that we offer, head over to PTPGun.com. Go to services. You can see all of our firearms training offerings that we have there. That list is constantly growing, and then more from Jason. All of this stuff will be down in the comments below, his social media and all that stuff. But you could find him over there at redpasstraining.com.
What social media platforms are you most active on?
So we're on Facebook at Redpass Training Solutions, and Instagram is the one that I actually prefer, and that's at Redpass Actual.
All right, cool.
A lot of people grab that actual thing lately, and I'm like, man, you know, should I be Mike Bell Actual or real Mike Bell? I don't know.
Hey, Mike, if you can see the bandwagon, it's too late to jump on it.
Ah, damn it. Yeah, I was telling somebody earlier, I was at the barber, and we're talking about crypto. And he was talking about, you know, all these coins and all that stuff. I said, one of the lessons I learned very early on in stock trading and crypto trading is this: buy the rumor and sell the news. There you go. Because if you're buying it on the news that it's going up, that means you're buying it because somebody else is selling it, right? Yeah. But anyhow, the last question, and this is that repetition. It talks about that repetition. The one thing you want people to take home is to be able to practice, 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 practice. One of the things, I'm going to harken back to 1999-ish, whenever you got that 1911 and that bucket of 45 and blew your wrist off, right? Firing that damn thing all summer long. How valuable do you think modern technology is, such as dry fire magazines, laser cartridges, different stuff like that, auto resetting devices, the red dot stuff, the Mantis X stuff that's out there? You know, how valuable do you think that is? And is it something that you recommend to your students when they leave?
I don't want to discount it, but I don't want people to feel as if it's necessary to get meaningful dry fire practice. You can literally have your firearm, your holster, and the way I do my dry fire, I don't really use any of that stuff. It's actually one of my daughter's like barrette kind of things that I stripped off, and I just put it in the little ways down in the chamber just to keep the slide out of battery. Okay, that way I've got an active trigger. And I use that through part of my dry process, and then the other time I'm just using the active trigger and just resetting it by hand. I think you can get a tremendous amount of meaningful dry fire practice done that way. The technology is certainly an aid. You know, I've done quite a bit of work with like the SIRT pistol and things like that. But, you know, honestly, over time, I've dropped a lot of the gadgets and just taken it back to the bare bones, you know.
Very cool. Yeah, and there's some pros and cons, guys. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, head over to PTPGun.com firearms training on YouTube, and we do a lot of reviews on some of that dry fire technology that exists out there. We also do a lot of drill work, so you can find all that stuff there if you're interested in learning.
We also occasionally do some giveaways, so make sure you not only subscribe, but you comment and interact so we know you're out there.
That's right, guys. Make sure you're dropping down into the comments and letting us know. With that, Jason and Ryan, first of all, Ryan, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. We all know how busy you are, for coming into the studio and joining me with Jason. But Jason, thank you so much, man. I know you're only out in Maryland once in a while. very blessed you took time away from your family and your wife to come over here and join us on the show.
Yeah, likewise.
Honor.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. Hey, just beat the shit out of the microphone.
I did it too.
And with that, guys, as always, please share this episode. Find us and support Jason. Support your local gun shop. And if you find yourself out in Utah, look up Redpass Training Solutions. And with that, guys, we're out.
Stay strapped to get gun.